In opulent palaces adorned with velvet and gold, the British royals etched their legacy in portraits and bloodlines. Yet, lurking beyond the throne, in the dimmest corners, were children who shattered the ideal. Confined to asylums, erased from history, or merely forgotten, these sons and daughters bore the discreet weight of disability in a dynasty fixated on perfection. This isn't merely the tale of monarchs, it is the saga of those they sought to erase. 30 royals, 30 children, all echoing a long silence that reverberates through the crown. Before we delve into our first royal secret, take a moment to subscribe. If you crave the forgotten corners of history, unsealed truths, and stories overlooked by official narratives, you've come to the right place. And while you're here, share where you're tuned in from, and what time it is as you listen. Is it midnight, noon, or somewhere in between? Let's explore how deeply this royal rabbit hole stretches. First, let's talk about Queen Victoria. Known as the grandmother of Europe, she was a powerful empress bound by the duties of a dynasty, her emotions kept in check as if rationed like sugar during war. Yet beneath the layers of widow's black and imperial grandeur, she held a perilous secret. Her youngest son, Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany, was afflicted with haemophilia, a hereditary condition that rendered even minor injuries potentially fatal. A simple bruise could escalate into a life-threatening crisis, and a fall could lead to a slow demise. The British public, however, remained blissfully unaware, perceiving Victoria's family as a picture of health, the epitome of royal vigour with 17 grandchildren destined for European thrones. Beneath this veneer of strength lay a hidden flaw, a hereditary curse of haemophilia that the royal family concealed. Admitting to such a weakness would invite political peril, undermining the very fabric of the monarchy founded on notions of divine right and genetic supremacy. The royal narrative had to be maintained, leading them to conceal not just the illness, but the pain, the medical treatments, and the heartbreaking losses, including the untimely death of Leopold at just 30 due to a mishap that turned fatal under the surface. Victoria's anguish was compounded by fear, the fear of having unknowingly passed this affliction along, particularly to her daughters who, while not symptomatic, were carriers in genetic terms. Her attempts to secure strategic marriages for them to quell the genetic curse only spread the condition further into the Spanish and Russian royal lines and among German nobles. Victoria didn't just reign over an empire, she inadvertently infected it. As royal blood flowed through wedding ceremonies and state banquets, haemophilia traveled incognito, masked by nobility. At the time, science had yet to unearth the nature of the condition. Its carrier residing on the X chromosome remained undiscovered for decades. Yet, amidst meticulous record-keeping within the royal household, there were likely whispers of the troubling truth. Too many young princes faced undue bleeding, too many deaths veiled in silence. Although Victoria never addressed the condition publicly, her private correspondence reveals her concern, contracting euphemisms about the fragile health of her grandchildren and anxieties over her daughters' unions. Historians have labelled this affliction the royal disease, a notion too neat for something so haunting. The more troubling inquiry is not how it perpetuated, but how successfully it was concealed, not merely in Britain, but across Europe, where image reigned over honesty, loyalty overshadowed well-being, and bloodlines eclipsed the lives that carried them. It poses an existential question. What transpires when the very essence of your legitimacy becomes the root of your tribulations? Leopold passed the curse onto his daughter, who continued the cycle, birthing yet another tragic chapter swathed in royal honor. In subsequent generations, the secret unraveled further, with the next lineage not only bearing the burden of the illness but also becoming its living testament, hidden from public eyes, stripped from photographs, and acknowledged only after it was too late. Now we journey into the tale of the prince who never had the chance to grow older. 2. Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany. Born as the youngest son to Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, he entered this world bearing the weight of expectation. Yet, perfection would always elude him. For Leopold, the life of a royal was marred by an unseen tragedy etched into his very DNA. From his earliest days, the royal doctors sensed an ominous truth. The boy couldn't heal, robbing him of the joy of play. In an era that celebrated strength, his frailty became a silent rebellion. He sat and observed as his brothers galloped on horseback, engaged in fencing, and hunted, while he remained confined to armchairs, meticulously crafting letters with a delicate hand. Despite being lauded as possibly the wisest among Victoria's offspring, intelligence rang hollow in a world dominated by brawn and spectacle. His mentors noted his gentle disposition and shades of melancholy. Yet, his mother, in her soft lamenting, juxtaposed his intellect against his suffering, an uneasy consolation. Then there was haemophilia, a term that, in the 1860s, resembled a curse far more than a diagnosis, bewildering even doctors who could not fathom why a mere cut could linger or why rest never sufficed. The royal household shrouded the condition as they would any familial disruption, prioritizing the monarchy's facade over the truth. Leopold, however, grasped the reality lurking in the shadows. He recognized the brevity of his existence and endeavored to counter that fate. Immersed in photography, philosophy, and the social realm, he engaged in vibrant correspondence, advocating for the underprivileged and conversing with thinkers of his time. His travels, however, were fraught with peril, scrutinized by wary physicians. The wedding to Princess Helena of Waldeck and Pyrmont reflected a glimmer of hope. Royal weddings, after all, typically herald stability and the potential for love to heal. Yet, genes are seldom forgiving. His daughter, Princess Alice of Albany, emerged healthy but inherited the invisible burden he bore. Leopold's twilight years descended into a peculiar tranquility, having outlasted grim predictions, albeit with a cost. Unrelenting pain and watchfulness shadowed his days. His letters turned inward, pondering the weight of legacy, as he grasped the spectral inheritance haunting his lineage. Then, in March 1884, while in Caen, a minor slip transformed tragically, an accident in anyone else's life, but for him, the implications loomed large. Hours later, the family gathered. Officially, he passed after a brief illness, but the reality was that same hidden flaw from birth, an imperfection no crown could cover. Queen Victoria mourned deeply, yet retained her composure, deliberately silent about the cause. The nation lamented the loss of a prince, while his family grieved for a shared affliction. Leopold's legacy, however, was far from concluded. His daughter, too, would unwittingly pass down this inscrutable inheritance to her son, yet another royal soul destined to suffer under a veiled ailment. The spectre of this royal malediction moved subtly, a whispered rumor intertwined with the bloodline of a dynasty. And so, a new chapter loomed on the horizon, rooted in the life of a young, unseen prince, forever sheltered from the public eye. As we embark on unearthing the first royal secret, remember to subscribe. If untold histories and hidden truths resonate with you, you've found your haven. And while you're here, comment below, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you? Midnight, noon, or the hours in between? Let's delve deep into this royal narrative. 3. King George V. An era cloaked in decorum. Immaculate uniforms, discreet servants, gleaming banisters, everything perfectly in its place, shrouded in silence. At the heart of this meticulously arranged world sat King George V, a man seemingly allergic to any hint of vulnerability. He was no poet, no visionary, lacking in warmth. A former naval officer, his passions revolved around stamps and strict discipline. embodying the notion that duty spoke volumes in silence. Enter Prince John, born in 1905, the youngest of George V's 6 children. The spare to the spare, a mere footnote of royalty from the outset. Initially, he appeared to be an ordinary child, albeit a bit boisterous, but by age 4, it became evident that he was different. He displayed unusual behavior, struggled with speech delays, and had coordination difficulties. Palace physicians, armed with the limited medical terminology of their time, whispered of nervous disorders and possible epileptic tendencies. Many today suggest he may have been autistic, or perhaps defied easy categorization altogether, an anomaly who simply did not belong and thus was rendered invisible. In the eyes of the House of Windsor, imperfection transcended inconvenience. It became a taboo. Gradually, Prince John was withdrawn from the public gaze. First fewer public appearances, followed by homeschooling, and then a discreet move to Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate, where he was cared for by a governess and staff who genuinely cherished him. Yet, love could not equate to freedom. Royal visits were rare, and photographs of John dwindled over time. By age 11, he was last captured in an official portrait, while his parents, George and Queen Mary, seldom mentioned him. It wasn't born from malice, but rather from a sense of duty. They convinced themselves that shielding him from public life constituted an act of kindness. After all, what would society do with a prince unable to wave gracefully, a boy who stuttered, twitched, or wandered? The monarchy was not designed to entertain such imperfections. John passed away in 1919 at just 13, after what was called a seizure, his funeral shrouded in privacy and his name largely obliterated from royal records. Years later, Queen Mary would characterize him as a source of great anxiety, her words echoing sentiments of both a mother's grief and the monarchy's institutional detachment. Yet, here lies the enigma. Those who tended to John at Wood Farm remember him as joyful, spirited, imaginative, and affectionate. He had a pet pony, built forts in the garden, and devised his own symbols to tell time. He was not a tragic figure until the world dictated he became one. The real mystery lies not only in the nature of his condition or its severity, but in why his narrative had to vanish entirely. Why did a child cherished by those around him fade into obscurity within the family story? What does it reveal about the monarchy, and about ourselves, that a prince could dissipate not through banishment but through sheer silence? John was not the only royal to reside on the fringes. He merely initiated a lineage of those facing hidden hardships. The next child to experience such concealment arrived generations earlier, amidst a reign steeped in madness, with a king who understood all too well the consequences of losing control. And this time, it wasn't merely the child who was hidden. It was an entire royal legacy that slipped into darkness. In the historical tapestry of monarchy, King George III stands out not just as the ruler who lost America, but as a monarch cloaked in a cloud of scandal that ran deeper than mere political strife. The hushed conversations echoing through Windsor Castle and the corridors of Parliament were not merely about tea or rebellion. They revolved around a more unsettling truth: the king's sanity. Was he mad? The question lingered, not consistently apparent, but surfacing unpredictably, like the capricious weather of the British Isles. Moments of clarity would give way to storms filled with disjointed utterances, frantic prayers, and ultimately, a facade of normalcy, genteel strolls in the garden as if nothing out of the ordinary had transpired. Throughout his reign, doctors used terms like nervous fever and melancholia to describe his episodes, a language that evolved into discussions of genetic disorders in later years. But during his reign, opinions were scattered, leading to confusion rather than clarity. Though King George fathered 15 children, casting doubt on the whispers of madness, the lingering spectre of mental instability cast a shadow over his progeny. His daughter, Princess Augusta Sophia, exhibited signs of anxiety and isolation, shunning potential suitors and court life. Meanwhile, Prince Ernest Augustus, the Duke of Cumberland, presented a different sort of challenge with his militaristic temperament and political radicalism, embroiled in controversies that hinted at a deeper tumult, a legacy of unpredictable behavior that stirred discomfort even among supporters. The interpretations of illness and eccentricity often hinged on perspective, revealing how the royal narrative could shift based on who crafted it. Emotional upheavals masqueraded as political threats, deeply entwined in the royal lineage. As symptoms of withdrawal and compulsions appeared, responses from the palace remained shrouded in silence and deliberate misdirection. The chaos within King George III reached legendary status, marked by locked doors and desperate calls for physicians, overshadowed by his public duties. At times, he spoke endlessly, words devolving into confusion, and in a peculiar episode, he mistook a tree for a foreign king. Yet, perhaps the most poignant irony of King George III's reign lies in the unyielding appearance of stability it presented to the outside world. For years, the monarchy's machine functioned smoothly, signing decrees and hosting grand balls, all while the king navigated a world half-anchored in chaos. His children bore witness to this duality, some inheriting echoes of their father's affliction, others merely absorbing the pervasive silence that surrounded it. This silence became entrenched within the royal lineage, a legacy as powerful as any title. What King George's reign ultimately revealed is that madness does not preclude power. At times, it may even enhance it, especially when wrapped in the regalia of royalty. As the generations advanced, the veneer of strength would remain, yet signs of frailty began to emerge quietly, suggesting that no monarchy, regardless of its might, can elude the grip of inherent fragility. In the end, a child would emerge, destined never to hold the crown, a testament to the precarious balance of legacy and the unrelenting march of time. 5. King Henry VIII. History paints Henry VIII with a brush of stark power. The imagery is striking, a figure of command, adorned and formidable, with eyes that reveal a predatory intensity. He is famously known as the monarch who severed ties with the Pope, established his own church, cycled through 6 wives as if they were mere trends, and tragically executed 2. An individual obsessed with his legacy, masculinity, and producing heirs. Yet beneath the regal bravado lay a father burdened with anxiety, a man haunted by the misfortunes plaguing his progeny, contributing to an ongoing uncertainty regarding the succession. His lone legitimate son, Edward VI, the much-anticipated male heir, arrived to the world through his 3rd wife, Jane Seymour, who perished mere days after giving birth. England finally had hope for its future. Yet, from the very beginning, Edward showed signs of frailty. He was delicate, often ill, and beset by obscure health issues, a common consensus among historians labeling him as a sickly child. Ascending the throne at the tender age of 9, his reign was largely managed by advisors as his health deteriorated, leaving him ghostly and isolated. By the time he reached 15, he was coughing up blood and could barely walk. He would not live to see his 16th birthday. Officially, his death was attributed to tuberculosis, but shadows of congenital defects whispered through the court, perhaps a reflection of Henry's own frail health or deeper familial issues. The demise of a prince unable to survive into adulthood, let alone ensure a lineage, was not merely a personal catastrophe. It posed a constitutional crisis. But Edward was not the first of Henry's offspring. There had been many pregnancies that ended in miscarriages and stillbirths. Some scholars posit that at least one of Henry and Catherine of Aragon's sons may have been born with visible deformities, only to pass away shortly thereafter, a reality that was never publicly confronted. In those times, unbaptized infants often slipped through the cracks of history, recorded only through euphemisms. Even his surviving daughters bore scars from this legacy. Mary, later infamously known as Bloody Mary, contended with suspected hormonal issues, bouts of melancholia, and perhaps phantom pregnancies. Elizabeth, displaying more intellect than most advisors, had a notoriously volatile temperament, which might today be recognized as anxiety or obsessive tendencies. The royal bloodline, in its fervent quest for an ideal heir, may have become ensnared in the very genetic complexities they sought to transcend. Ironically, despite Henry's intense focus on health, strong sons, and a flawless succession, his lineage yielded a succession of fragile rulers, both physically and mentally. He shattered the church for an heir, only to see that heir falter before wielding power. Legacy proved no guarantee of endurance, nor did it expunge the hereditary shadows lurking beneath the throne. Yet, the crown's relentless demand for continuity persisted. The following ruler would strive with even greater urgency, enduring 17 pregnancies in her fervent quest for a single living heir. When success finally smiled upon her, it only invited further contemplation about divine retribution, physical frailty, and a child destined to govern but never to thrive. In the annals of history, there exists a poignant figure, Queen and of Great Britain. Not a warrior draped in victory, nor a conqueror relishing in accolades, but rather a sovereign defined by her extraordinary resilience. Her reign subsisted over a united kingdom, yet her personal journey unfolded like a relentless tragedy marked by loss. With 17 pregnancies to her name, only one child, William, the Duke of Gloucester, emerged from infancy. None lived to adulthood, amplifying her despair. William's birth in 1689 sparked ephemeral joy in the court, symbolizing a glimmer of hope after years of heart-wrenching disappointment. Yet, this hope was overshadowed by cruel reality. Almost from the moment he arrived, William evidenced the telltale signs of a debilitating condition known as hydrocephalus, a tragic affliction that leads to fluid pressure in the brain and complicates development. Historical records reveal a boy marked by a large head, unsteady walking, and frequent medical crises. Despite the adoration of his parents and the royal pomp that surrounded him, shadows loomed in the court reports, hinting at his frail existence. As he navigated early childhood, William was the pride of the household, clad in princely attire, the subject of jubilant portraits. However, beneath the veneer of royal celebration, his struggles persisted. Limited mobility and uncertain speech plague him, while doctors deployed every possible method, from bloodletting to mysterious remedies, all in vain. Unspoken among courtiers was the tragic reality. This boy destined to be king was unlikely to ascend the throne. Just shy of his 11th birthday, William succumbed to a fever, with whispers of deeper truths swirling in the court. For Queen Anne, who had endured countless hardships in motherhood, once again, the mantle of heirlessness fell upon her. Adorned in mourning attire thereafter, she ruled over a unified kingdom while her heart bore the scars of personal loss. Her reign spanned a magnificent landscape, yet internally, she grappled with the demise of her lineage, agonized further by betrayals and the passing of loved ones. Queen Anne's grief lingered unyieldingly, as the hardships of her life served as a silent backdrop to her rule. The child who once embodied hope transformed into a somber reminder that royal expectations can seldom be predicted. As destiny unfolded, the very court that mourned her child would soon embrace a new dynasty, emerging from foreign realms to seize the throne, their early decisions echoing tragedy by hiding away a daughter in shame beneath the palace's watchful eyes. As we delve into the annals of history, we uncover a tale of royal intrigue and tragedy, centered around King George II of Britain. The Hanoverians, with their powdered wigs and thick German accents, arrived in England carrying not only their lineage but a significant misinterpretation of English social nuances. While George was never a beacon of charm, he embodied a stark indifference, struggling with a language foreign to him and a culture he largely ignored. His personal affairs, however, painted a sordid contrast to his political demeanour. His marriage to Sophia de Ratha, a distant cousin, was initially one of political strategy but soon spiralled into a scandalous tale of betrayal. As both indulged in affairs, the king took drastic action. He ended their union not with grace but with a vengeance, confining Sophia in Alden House, far from her children, stripped of any opportunity for rehabilitation. For over 3 decades, she existed in a somber state, a spectral presence maintained yet out of mind, her very name banished from court. Beneath the surface of this confinement lies an even deeper enigma. Historical records hint at Sophia's descent into mental illness during her years of isolation, marked by severe bouts of depression, paranoia, and an unsettling disconnect from reality. No official acknowledgement emerged. The monarchy preferred to keep silent about the tormented state of a disgraced consort. Yet, whispers from her household staff and foreign envoys reveal a troubled soul, perhaps eroded by her torturous confinement. Was her psychological decline a product of her genetics or the suffocating circumstances? Or was there something more sinister lurking in her lineage? The mystery deepens with her son, who would ascend the throne as George II, having grown up with the spectre of a mother never spoken of, her name omitted even from his coronation ceremony. When she passed away in 1726, her funeral, shrouded in secrecy, saw no attendance from her children. Sophia had effectively become a hidden chapter in royal history, her existence relegated to quiet sorrow rather than overt acknowledgement. As Britain welcomed a new king and a burgeoning empire, the narrative surrounding Sophia de Ratha faded into obscurity, a silence unbroken over the years. This unwritten tradition of erasing women, locked away for the sake of royal decorum, was not an anomaly amid the Hanoverians, but rather a recurring theme, haunting queens and princesses destined to be mere footnotes within the broader pages of history. 8. King George II. By the time George II ascended the throne, the British monarchy had transformed into a grand machine, polished, impersonal, and fixated on image. Emotions played little role in his reign. Both his personal and political relationships were marked by formality, strictness, and a certain emotional distance. Yet, lurking beneath the rigid portraits and composed demeanour was his daughter, Princess Amelia, whose presence subtly disrupted this royal facade. Born in 1711, Amelia was the quintessential royal daughter, often slipping into the shadows of historical records, unmarried, dutiful, with a passion for equestrian pursuits and charitable endeavours. Yet, those who closely studied her could discern anomalies. Her eyes weren't merely weak, they suffered from an alarming visual degradation that hindered her ability to read, manage stairs, or indulge in the refined pastimes expected of nobility. As time progressed, she became essentially blind. The court refrained from officially recognizing this as a disability, instead portraying her condition as a delicate constitution. Frequently encouraged to take rest, she became increasingly shielded from public scrutiny, her life a little world apart. Correspondences reveal she was sensitive to light, often dizzy, and delayed in certain mental faculties. Hints of neurological issues flickered through her letters: tremors, migraines, and episodes of unexplained retreat. Amelia's challenges were not only ocular. Something deeper seethed beneath the surface, unsettling for a royal family that thrived on control. Choosing not to marry, whether by will or circumstance, her existence remained intertwined with her family's shadow. She managed a household, tended to charitable works, and was often described as gentle yet lost in thought, her mind seeming to drift elsewhere. Tales of her solitary wanderings through the gardens, whispering to herself, surfaced occasionally, although seldom made public. After all, royals couldn't show vulnerability. They simply retired early, portraying sensitivity rather than illness. George II's reflections on his daughter's struggles were scarce. As a ruler who prioritized order over introspection, one might ponder his thoughts as he witnessed Amelia's gradual fade from the public eye. In a lineage accustomed to gently masking inconvenient realities, from secluded wives to erased sons, Amelia became just another soft disappearance. When she passed in 1786 at the age of 75, her life was largely overshadowed by the subsequent generation. With no scandals, marriages, or offspring, her legacy became a quiet existence, relegated to the margins of royal memory and recounted primarily in footnotes of history and small charitable efforts. Yet, Amelia embodies an aspect the monarchy has often avoided addressing: the slow decline of visibility as a survival tactic. When a royal deviates from the expected narrative, too fragile, too distinct, or too unhurried, the system doesn't adapt, it curates. Softly, bureaucratically, until even the memories begin to fade. However, the next royal child would pose a greater challenge to erase, for when an heir begins to falter, simply sending them away is no longer an option. One must revise the future around their silence and hope the gaps go unnoticed. In the chronicles of British royalty, we encounter Edward VII, a monarch destined for greatness. Born to the illustrious Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, Edward lingered in the shadows for almost 60 years before claiming the throne. When he finally emerged to reign, he carried the weight of a man seasoned by scandal and burdened by his mother's formidable expectations. Fondly called Bertie by his acquaintances, Edward preferred the lively atmosphere of Parisian eateries over the rigidity of parliamentary debate. Yet, beneath his dapper exterior resided a persistent unease, particularly regarding his eldest son. Enter Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, a child heralded as the future beacon of the monarchy. Born in 1864, he boasted the right name, lineage, and a visage that could grace any royal portrait. However, under the pomp of royal celebrations lay unsettling truths. From a young age, Albert Victor exhibited a peculiar distance. His tutors noted his struggle with concepts and muddled speech. Learning proved a challenge, and he lacked the inquisitiveness expected of a future king. In hindsight, many biographers suggested he may have faced an unrecognized developmental issue, possibly residing on the autism spectrum, a diagnosis non-existent during his lifetime. Instead, his caretakers managed their growing panic with a facade of dignity, scripting speeches and shrouding him from public scrutiny. To the world, he appeared dashing and composed. Behind palace doors, he was a riddle, kind-hearted yet often aloof in interactions. A passive presence, he relied on prompts for direction, seemingly acting out a role he never fully comprehended. His status as the heir's heir made his existence unassailable. Thus, the royal machine worked tirelessly to maintain his public image, choreographing every appearance while conveniently glossing over his flaws. He was briefly engaged to Princess Mary of Teck, later known as Queen Mary, but their plans were thwarted by unforeseen circumstances. Tragedy struck in 1892 when, at the tender age of 28, Albert Victor fell victim to influenza during a widespread outbreak. The royal family's mourning was profound. The heir to the heir had vanished, leaving a familial void. Yet, amidst the layers of grief, a subtle and unspoken relief may have lingered: the cessation of pressure to mold him into a ruler and mask his challenges. In a matter of days, his legacy shifted as his younger brother, George, who would become George V, assumed his position in line and ultimately wed Princess Mary, who was once engaged to Albert. Thus, the royal narrative continued, mired in a blend of romantic folklore and whispers of doubt regarding Albert Victor's legacy. Unsubstantiated rumors surfaced, involving darker scandals that further embellished the mystery he left behind. But perhaps the deeper, more poignant truth remains that he was a prince enmeshed in a royal duty his mind faltered to grasp, within a system reluctant to acknowledge such realities. As the monarchy pressed forward, the discomfort with uniqueness would deepen in the next generation, leading to a queen adored globally, whose lineage harbored secrets of two royal children obscured by institutional veils and falsified records. In the grand narrative of history, few figures stand as resolute as Queen Elizabeth II, an embodiment of unyielding duty amidst a world swirling with chaos. She represented an unwavering pillar of stability, her personal humanity often overshadowed by a facade of regal composure. Her movements were deliberate, her voice maintained a steady calm, and her emotions remained carefully restrained. Yet, behind the grandeur of monarchy lay unnoticed cracks, subtle voids that revealed missing pieces of the royal fabric. Among these fragments were the stories of two cousins, Narissa and Catherine Beauce-Lyon, daughters of the Queen Mother's brother. Born into privilege during the 1910s, they shared the royal bloodline yet were marked by profound intellectual disabilities. At a time when society was unforgiving toward such differences, they became the subject of fear rather than compassion, a tragic reflection of early 20th century attitudes toward disability. As it became evident that Narissa and Catherine could not fulfill the expectations set for royals, a clandestine decision unfolded. In 1941, they were admitted to the Royal Earlswood Institution for the Mentally Disabled, a Victorian asylum designed to segregate those deemed unfit. Their identities were obscured. Falsified names ensured they essentially vanished from royal life and public memory, their records reflecting a fabricated death long before their actual passing. For the royal family, this was portrayed as a protective measure. Historians, however, view it through the lens of image preservation. Imperfection could not coexist with the idealized monarchy. Narissa passed away in 1986, her grave distinguished only by a plastic tag, while Catherine remained until 2014, reportedly blissfully unaware of her noble lineage. Visits from the royal family were absent, with the institution staff filling the familial void. When these revelations surfaced in the 1980s, they ignited public outrage. How could a monarchy that professed compassion and unity hide its own relatives to maintain decorum? The palace's response was muted, steeped in historical context yet failing to provide true absolution. Time, they learned, does not erase secrecy. It amplifies its complexities. The world watched as Queen Elizabeth presided over a family that clung to invisibility as a remedy for embarrassment, an irony not lost on those who recalled her father, King George VI, who battled his own struggles with public speech. The monarchy's most profound challenges arose not from scandal, but from its own tangled heritage, revealing the depth of human imperfection even within the royal fold. 11. King George VI, the reluctant monarch. His ascent to the throne was never part of his grand design. Born as the second son, often overshadowed by his elder brother, Edward VIII, George VI was the quiet, unassuming royal, destined to remain in the background as Edward took the lead of the monarchy. However, destiny took a sudden and scandalous turn when Edward abdicated in 1936 for the love of a divorced American woman, thrusting George into an unexpected position of power. Reluctantly and with apprehension, he stepped into the public eye, battling not just the pressures of leadership during a tumultuous time but also a significant speech impediment that turned every utterance into a challenge. The public recognized him as the king who bravely navigated the nation through war, yet beneath this exterior, his greatest battle lay within. From his youth, George, affectionately known as Bertie, faced a stammer that wasn't mild but marked and haunting, instilling fear in his family and shame in him throughout royal gatherings. Speaking in public felt like an endless torment, turning even casual conversations into daunting obstacles. In an era when monarchs were expected to convey authority with eloquence, his stammer felt less a mere ailment and more a threat to royal convention. The royal family employed various methods to address this issue: speech therapists, vocal trainers, and even specialized breathing techniques borrowed from seasoned performers. One notable instructor, the Australian elocutionist Lionel Logue, believed that emotional scars, beyond physical challenges, were at the core of the problem. Their training sessions became iconic, later portrayed in the film The King's Speech. However, the sanitized retelling overlooked a crucial truth. George VI's stammer was not simply a challenge to conquer, it was a relentless struggle that reshaped the monarchy itself. Each public appearance was fraught with tension, every address a balancing act between calm and dread. His Christmas speeches were painstakingly rehearsed, with phrases segmented for ease, breaths carefully paced. Yet, there were moments when his stammer emerged victorious. Moreover, he was not alone in grappling with such challenges within the family. His daughter, Princess Margaret, reportedly faced subtle developmental difficulties during her childhood. While not overtly severe, her issues with focus and coordination sparked concern within royal circles, not due to any failure but rather the lack of perfection. By this period, the House of Windsor had mastered the art of concealment. Weaknesses were reframed as quirks, conditions brushed off as mere habits, and disorders minimized to personal obstacles. While George VI's stammer could not be entirely hidden, it was far too pronounced. It was often presented through a lens of patriotic struggle, morphing into a symbol of resilience. Yet, an unsettling question remained. What becomes of a nation's figurehead when they struggle to communicate? When the voice of the monarchy falters, fluency becomes critical, whether in speech or in projecting a commanding image filled with an inheritance of strength. With every speech he delivered, George VI gently shattered this carefully crafted illusion, not through rebellion but via his tremors, pauses, and the quiet burden of his quest for perfection in an unforgiving realm. And while George was certainly not the first royal to contend with such burdens, the legacy of these struggles can be traced back through history, entwined within the Stuart lineage, where monarchs passed down not just crowns but shadows. The inheritors of this daunting legacy were born into a realm of masks, where even the keenest intellects grappled with the most profound uncertainties. In the grand tapestry of history, we find King James I of England, a monarch whose legacy is entwined with intellect and intrigue. Known as the Scholar King, he was fluent in both Latin and Greek, possessed an insatiable zeal for theology, had a fascination with witch trials, and believed stanchly in the divine right of kings. Clad in a crown, James carried himself with the grace of a philosopher, effortlessly weaving together scripture and Aristotle's wisdom. Yet, beneath this veneer of intellectualism lay a man whose physical body often betrayed him, mired in a lineage fraught with instability and shadows. Contemporaries noted James's unusual afflictions. He moved awkwardly and required assistance. In his youth, he struggled with drooling and stammering in tense moments, accompanied by compulsive mannerisms that led to silent looks of concern from foreign diplomats. While we might now speculate he was neurodivergent, such terminology was foreign to his time. Instead, courtiers honed the art of feigned ignorance, and historians wrote around his peculiarities. Regardless of his physical discomforts, James was an astute thinker, a passionate debater, and deeply paranoid. His correspondence revealed erratic shifts in mood, oscillating between warmth and suspicion, leaving him distrustful, even of his own children, an understandable stance in a world where loyalty often wavered. Among his progeny, his daughter, Princess Elizabeth, shone as a notable figure, marrying into the Palatinate and revered for her political acumen. Yet the enigma deepens within her descendants, where several siblings, raised in the complex courts of the Holy Roman Empire, exhibited signs of emotional or mental challenges. Prince Rupert, for instance, was seen as brilliant yet unpredictable, swinging from laser-focused determination to recklessness. In contrast, his brother, Prince Maurice, met a premature demise shrouded in whispers. Yet, it was not merely the sons who carried the weight of legacy. It was a recurrent theme unfolding across generations of the Stuart bloodline. This saga hinted at what 17th-century observers described as melancholy or madness, not the poetic brooding of tragic characters, but genuine afflictions often concealed from public view, at times leading to a life of seclusion. Was this hereditary? The result of inbreeding? Or perhaps an unavoidable consequence of royal existence, marked by isolation, immense pressure, and the expectation to exude normality while grappling with the extraordinary? King James might have pondered these questions had he lived in a more enlightened age. However, his worldview lacked the subtlety for such contemplations. In his royal court, any deviation from the norm was interpreted as divine retribution or, more ominously, as signs of demonic influence. After all, James was the author of a treatise on witchcraft. Even amid his deep anxieties over the supernatural, he could not escape the subtle thread of neurological issues woven through his lineage, a legacy adorned in royal finery that would resonate in the future. This inheritance would echo through not just sons and grandsons, but also in a child born to his granddaughter, a boy destined to unify crowns and reshape empires, even as he silently battled compulsions and anxieties that would likely draw modern medical interest. Yet in his era, the only diagnostic label of consequence remained clear. He was the king, and kings were not afforded the luxury of appearing haunted by their own shadows. Mary, Queen of Scots, a name steeped in drama, she glides through candlelit corridors, leaving behind love letters cloaked in ciphers, with betrayals etched into the annals of history, reminiscent of an opera libretto. Her life unfolded at the nexus of myth and monarchy, a Catholic in a Protestant realm, a beauty amidst brutality, a royal woman in an age that desired its queens to remain silent. Yet, history often glosses over her true legacy, one of instability inherited by those who followed. Her son, James VI of Scotland, who would ascend as James I of England, received not only her crown but her political savvy and, perhaps more subtly, her underlying anxiety. Embracing the identity of a scholar king, he became known for his sharp intellect tinged with paranoia. Yet, he was merely a continuation in a curious lineage. The traits of his reign, obsessive thoughts and social awkwardness, echoed through generations, growing increasingly conspicuous and disruptive. Many modern scholars ponder whether these traits represent mere personality quirks or an underlying thread of neurodivergence interwoven through Mary's descendants, revealing a hereditary sensitivity that threaded through the Stuart dynasty. While no definitive medical diagnosis emerges, patterns present themselves. Royals who spoke rapidly or fell into silence, who were either unsettlingly calm or tumultuously volatile, who succumbed to obsession, retreated into themselves, or crumbled beneath the pressures of royalty. Mary herself exhibited emotional extremes well before her infamous demise. As a teenager, her vivacity and flirtation coexisted with impulsive and moody tendencies, capturing the adoration and trepidation of her courtiers. She married young, faced widowhood prematurely, and endured a poorly matched second marriage, witnessing her husband's murder divide her reign into chaos. Her choices were not merely controversial, they were unpredictable, often reckless, hard to counsel, and even harder to calm. Imprisoned by her cousin, Elizabeth I, for 19 long years, Mary filled countless pages with letters, woven with obsessions about conspiracies and covert promises. Though her intellect remained sharp, her grip on reality often slipped. As paranoia enveloped her, alliances contradictory in nature emerged, yet she insisted on her claim as the rightful Queen of England, even as her existence dwindled to guarded chambers and ink-stained quills. The Stuart lineage would inherit both her grace and her turbulence. What commenced with Mary's allure and James' compulsions ultimately spiraled into a monarch incapable of maintaining his sanity long enough to reign. This troubled lineage, however, did not solely flow through kings and sons but through queens and mothers as well. One such daughter, used as a political pawn, transported like fine porcelain to a rival court, would carry the exact instabilities of her ancestry into a burgeoning dynasty. From her lineage, the bloodline would fracture yet again, weaving its way into the realms of England and France, and leaving imprints on the pages of European psychiatry itself. King Charles VI of France, not British by birth, yet his descent into madness echoed far beyond French borders. The moment his daughter, Catherine of Valois, united with Henry V of England, their marriage became a complex web of political strategy rather than romantic ties. Her dowry served as a peace treaty, while her potential as a mother represented a volatile legacy linked to a man infamous across Europe, Charles the Mad. Ascending the throne with youthful vigor and intelligence, Charles VI quickly saw this promise spiral into chaos. By his mid-twenties, his mind began to betray him. He was plagued by violent outbursts, haunting delusions of fragility, and eerie lapses in recognizing even his closest kin. In fits of fear, he raced through the palace, only to fall silent for hours on end. For centuries, historians have speculated about his condition. Could it be schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or maybe an inherited ailment exacerbated by centuries of inbreeding? Regardless of the source, the ramifications rippled through the French crown and crossed the Channel to England. Catherine's legacy was fraught with implications, cementing her marriage to Henry V as a pivotal yet fleeting alliance. Their brief union ended abruptly with his untimely death, leaving their infant son, Henry VI, to bear the weight of two crowns at merely 9 months old. A child burdened with the genes of a conqueror father and a collapsing grandfather, he faced a tumultuous reign marked by endless strife. Historians often attribute Henry VI's later mental unraveling to the immense pressures of war and political conflict. Yet, the eerie parallels with Charles VI's own struggles, sudden lapses into catatonia, disjointed speech, and disorienting hallucinations, were impossible to ignore. At times, he even forgot his own identity, leading many to speculate about an inherited madness that lingered like a shadow over the royal lineage. Meanwhile, Catherine, though widowed and out of political favour, forged an unexpected bond with Owen Tudor, a figure considered socially beneath her. This union would later give rise to a new bloodline, ultimately leading to the emergence of Henry VIII and the Tudor dynasty. The shadows of Charles VI's madness stretched across thrones, linking France and England through a princess who remained enigmatic and a politically motivated marriage overshadowed by mistrust. If Charles VI's legacy continues to shadow British royal history, it is not solely because of his tumultuous reign. His influence resonates through the silence surrounding fragile heirs, the veiled whispers in royal biographies, and the persistence of particular familial traits that refuse to fade, regardless of how many generations pass. The currents of royalty flowed through personal connections and tragic losses, hinting that the spectre of madness could always return in a royal household, a realm where fragility was discussed in hushed tones and a young girl's peculiarities were dismissed as mere charm, until whispers arose that she may never truly earn her crown. Then there was Edward, known as Longshanks, a ruler of relentless resolve. Renowned for his merciless campaigns, he built formidable castles with cold precision, leading his armies with a seemingly instinctive fierceness. His legacy, brutal, yet undeniable, shaped the very fabric of history. King Edward I of England etched his legacy into the very fabric of the British Isles. Yet, even with his formidable prowess on the battlefield, he was not immune to the silent frailties entwined within his lineage. Among his numerous offspring, at least 16 recorded, one stood apart from the rest. Her name was Joan of Acre. Born in 1272 in the tumult of a crusade in the city of Acre, her entrance into the world was steeped in both violence and divine purpose. Young and unbending, she was brought back to England, raised within the strict confines of royal expectations and decorum. As the daughter of a monarch renowned for his discipline and strategic coldness, Joan was destined to fulfill her royal duty through marriage, diplomacy, and obedience. However, chronicles written years after her demise suggest a child who defied the royal paradigm. Some writers, in their coded narratives, describe her as frail and strange, hinting at behaviors that set her apart from her peers. In a time devoid of terms for neurodivergence, this peculiar language reveals not physical frailty but a divergence in perception and cognition, subtle yet persistent enough to note. Despite these whispers, Joan remained intertwined with royal affairs, marrying twice in her lifetime. Her first union with Gilbert de Clare, the influential Earl of Gloucester, was a political arrangement sealed before her teenage years, resulting in 4 children. After his passing, she sought love anew, marrying Ralph de Montermer, a commoner, in a clandestine ceremony that sparked scandal. Defying her father's wishes, she faced dire consequences. Edward confiscated her lands and imprisoned Ralph, only conceding after Joan gave birth to yet another child, turning scandal into a semblance of a dynasty. Was this act rebellion, emotional turmoil, or simply the defiance of a headstrong princess seizing her solitary chance for agency? The answer remains elusive. Remarkably, shortly after these events, Joan's presence in the historical records fades. She passed away at the tender age of 35, often described as fragile, suggesting an intricate interplay of health and circumstance throughout her life. Joan's tale does not culminate in infamy or monumental conflicts, but rather in a quiet erasure. Her interment at Clare Priory remains but a whisper in the annals of history. A royal daughter who seemingly did not serve as a political pawn or a lesson in caution, but rather stands as a curious enigma. Yet, the legacy she derived from Edward I would resonate beyond her era. His heritage was not merely an account of conquests, but a lineage of descendants, many harboring hidden vulnerabilities beneath their crowns. One of these would, a generation later, face an even more public unraveling. A girl destined for power, her marriage dictated by politics, gradually driven into a silence that no throne could shield her from. In the annals of English history, one king stands out with a complexity as fiery as his spirit, Henry II. The visionary behind the Angevins, he commanded more territory than any English monarch before him, yet lived under a cloud of mistrust, even toward his own progeny. With a reign marked by brute force, keen strategy, and monumental intellect, he surrounded himself with legal minds, crafted institutions, and clashed with ecclesiastical authorities, all while holding the thrones of Europe alarmingly close. Yet, amid his dynastic ambitions, there remained one daughter who slipped through his adept grasp, forever obscured from the light of history, Eleanor of England. Like many noble women of the 12th century, her life was constructed around symbolic alliances, destined to marry into influence and secure family power. Born in 1162, she represented Henry's union with Eleanor of Aquitaine and was married off at 14 to Alfonso VII of Castile, an alliance meant to extend England's reach into the Iberian Peninsula. On the face of it, her marriage succeeded. Eleanor became a mother, giving birth to several children, including Berengaria, who would wed England's Richard the Lionheart, her brother. However, as the decades unfurled, whispers crept from Castile of her withdrawal from society. The official statement spoke of health declines, religiosity, and the grief of lost children, But behind the curtain of formalities lay a more unsettling truth. Eleanor reportedly became withdrawn and volatile, with Spanish chronicles hinting at periods of silence, overwhelming sadness, and episodes of disorientation that troubled her attendants. Some scholars speculate that she may have faced a late-emerging mental illness, wrought by sorrow, seclusion, or a hereditary inclination. One account from a monastery depicts her as once poised and articulate, now troubled and increasingly isolated. Others alluded to a nervous condition that necessitated her relocation from the bustling court to more tranquil surroundings. While medical records of the time are non-existent, her gradual fading from the public eye echoes concerns still familiar today, a royal not vanishing from the world but from her very essence. What appears at first to be an individual tragedy soon reveals a more profound legacy within the Plantagenet lineage. Henry II's infamous mood swings and erratic choices echoed through his sons, Richard and John, both marked by impulsive behaviours and, in John's case, cruel tendencies that bordered on the pathological. The brilliance of the family was overshadowed by imbalance, and Eleanor's retreat did not halt this cycle but instead passed it down, a grim inheritance of instability. The following dynasty would see these turbulent traits rise ever closer to the throne, culminating in a king remembered not for his strategies or conquests, but for the profoundly public unraveling of his mind, as though history had finally grown weary of concealing the truth. King Richard II, crowned at the tender age of just 10, was draped in gold and burdened with immense expectations. He inherited a throne still trembling from recent rebellions, and from the very beginning, the crown seemed an ill fit for the young monarch. It wasn't for lack of intellect, but rather a glaring absence of stability. To his supporters, Richard embodied refinement, artistry, and divine inspiration, while critics viewed him as erratic and dangerous. History paints him as one of the most psychologically complex rulers in England, a king whose struggles were less about politics and more entangled in the mysteries of his own mind. Born in 1367, he was the grandson of Edward III and the son of Edward the Black Prince, who had passed away before he could claim the throne. This left young Richard in a precarious position amid turbulent political times. His boyhood was marked by the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, which he navigated with unexpected poise, confronting rebel leader Wat Tyler directly. Yet, this instance of bravery proved to be a rarity. As he grew older, hints of disarray surfaced. Richard favoured a close-knit circle and withdrew from traditional court practices, fixating on pomp and the sacred essence of kingship. His rule often played out like a grand performance, complete with extravagant pageants and religious displays in his honour. He portrayed himself not merely as a king, but as a radiant figure akin to Christ, untouchable and resplendent. However, beneath this carefully constructed facade lay a darker reality, marked by paranoia and sudden cruelty. One moment he could be calm and collected, the next, a storm of punishment and retribution would follow. Nobles were exiled without reason, property seized, and former allies swiftly turned into foes. Richard believed his authority was not only absolute but almost metaphysical. Contemporaries and chroniclers, such as Thomas Walsingham, voiced concerns over Richard's mental health, describing him as brooding and detached from reality, unable to reconcile contradictions. There were episodes that hinted at dissociation, moments where he seemed lost in a trance, oblivious to his surroundings. Ultimately, his downfall loomed large. In 1399, Henry Bolingbroke, future Henry IV, returned from exile, seized the throne with minimal resistance, and deposed Richard. The king was arrested, imprisoned in Pontefract Castle, and died under mysterious circumstances. Officially, it was said he wasted away, yet unofficially, it marked the unsettling end of a reign characterized by chaos in trust, power, and perhaps within Richard himself. But Richard's tale isn't isolated within his lineage. As a Plantagenet, he emerged from a line of rulers who shone fiercely only to falter early on. This unpredictability wasn't merely personal. It echoed through generations. The next king would inherit this legacy, delving into deeper emotional instability and what modern historians suspect to be a significant neurological disorder. He would disappear, not in the heat of conflict, but within the confines of his own mind, teetering on the brink of catatonia and signaling the twilight of a dynasty. If a monarchy could be haunted, the reign of Henry VI was a daylight séance, drenched in an unsettling aura felt by all yet inexplicable. Born into an era of conflict, crowned as an infant, he inherited dual kingdoms before he could walk. England and France were his by lineage, yet they slipped through his fingers swiftly, as Henry VI was no ordinary king, and everyone sensed it. Arriving in 1421 as the sole offspring of Henry V and Catherine of Valois, Henry ascended the English throne at just 9 months, and by the age of 10, he was King of France through his mother's lineage. He was enveloped by regents, clergy, and ambitious nobles who exploited his silence, seeing it as an opportunity for their aspirations. Yet that silence never lifted. Henry was gentle, devout, and strikingly passive. Attributes that could shine in a monk proved disastrous for a ruler during the 100 Years' War. He had scant interest in governance and struggled to assert his influence. Where others rallied troops, he lost himself in scripture, all while England simmered with unrest. Many chroniclers deemed him simplistic, while others hinted at a deeper issue. It wasn't until 1453, at the age of 31, that Henry's plight could no longer be hidden. That year, he experienced what scholars today assert was a complete mental breakdown. He fell silent entirely, failing to recognize even his own newborn son, gazing through courtiers as if they were mere shadows. For over a year, he was unresponsive, devoid of orders, reactions, or awareness. Present-day theories suggest he may have suffered from catatonic schizophrenia, a likely hereditary condition, tracing back to a lineage of mental struggles through his maternal grandfather, Charles VI of France, who had famously believed himself glass and forgotten his own name. That same flickering detachment from reality seemed to haunt the family, passing through generations like a curse. After a partial recovery in 1455, Henry was irrevocably changed. His relapses would surface in times of stress, making him a pawn in the ongoing strife between rival factions, the Lancastrians and Yorkists. His rule became a tragic irony. He transformed into a mere relic rather than a ruler. Margaret of Anjou, his resolute wife, took up the reins, fiercely advocating for his and their son's claims. However, their boy, Edward of Westminster, brought his own storms. Reports painted him as violent and unpredictable, raising quiet fears about the family's bloodline. Henry VI met his end in 1471 inside the Tower of London under obscure circumstances. Officially noted as melancholy, unofficially, it reflected political expediency. Regardless, he left behind a kingdom in tatters and an incomprehensible legacy. The shadow of his reign would not easily dissipate. It lingered, passing into the care of another bloodline, another monarch, setting the stage for a tragic tale soon to unfold, not amidst battle's chaos, but within the delicate spirit of a young girl, her fragility forever captured in silken letters and solemn hymns. King James II figure often seen in portraits as composed, perhaps even detached, with eyes that seem to linger on the edge of ennui, bordering on boredom. This king preferred the roar of battle to the quiet intrigue of the throne room, a ruler overshadowed by the weight of religious stubbornness and the imposition of Catholicism in largely Protestant England. King James II's reign came crashing down during the Glorious Revolution of 1688, leading to his swift exile. However, Beneath the public narrative of a beleaguered monarch lies a more intimate and heart-wrenching story, one that pulses through his lineage and is personified by his daughter, Princess Louisa Maria Stuart. The youngest of his offspring, Louisa was ushered into the world in exile. Born in 1692 at Saint-Germain, France, a mere 4 years after her father had been unseated from a throne that he could scarcely call his own. Louisa entered a complex court filled with shattered dreams, where Jacobite loyalists desperately clung to visions of restoring the Stuart name. Surrounding her were French courtiers who tolerated them with restrained patience, and her weary parents, James and Mary of Modena, striving to maintain the illusion of continued royalty. Initially, she seemed to embody hope, a fresh princess, a potential bridge to legitimacy. But whispers of concern quickly spread across the court. Described as delicate and frail from birth, Louisa suffered throughout her life with health issues, often bedridden and lacking in vitality. While her noble peers were learning the graceful dance of courtly life, her days were filled with medical visits and whispers of her fragility. Contemporary historians suspect that she might have battled a congenital condition, one that compromised her immune system or hindered her development. Her speech was hesitant, her physical abilities diminished. Some accounts paint her mother, Mary of Modena, as fearful of exposing Louisa to public gaze, worried not just for her health, but also for the visible signs of her weakness. Yet, official portraits depicted Louisa with an air of almost aggressive normalcy, rosy cheeks, no hint of illness, dressed regally. It was a facade. The court couldn't afford imperfection, clinging fiercely to an image of divine legitimacy and hereditary power. To acknowledge that their last princess was unwell or incapable of ruling would have been a blow too devastating politically. Tragically, Louisa passed away at the tender age of 9, with a cause noted as sudden illness. But this conclusion came as no surprise to those who had witnessed her gradual decline. The news sent shockwaves through the Jacobite court, sparking not just sorrow, but a profound fear. The myth of a restored Stuart dynasty seemed harder to uphold. With her passing, the hope of a rejuvenated monarchy was extinguished, painted instead as folklore, repainted by those who believed in a rapturous return. Amidst this turbulence lies the bitter truth. Louisa, a child born into a fading legacy, posed no threat to anyone. In exile, the monarchy still demanded silence, reshaping truths into narratives that served them, rather than facing the fragile realities of individuals like Louisa. This troubling pattern of manipulation did not dissolve with the Stuarts. It transformed, merely awaiting the next generations of royals, who would learn that even the most divine heritage can cast shadows, shadows that would loom upon their return to England, to the throne, and linger in the hearts of children, whose silent battles would once again be cloaked in dangerous secrecy. In the annals of history, King Henry, the unexpected heir among the sons of William the Conqueror, never envisioned a crown adorned with his name. Yet, through the currents of political turmoil, Henry I, known as Henry I, emerged victorious, seizing the throne and ruling with an icy precision. With a mind sharp as a sword and an uncommon literacy for a king of his era, he navigated the labyrinth of power. However, lurking beneath this shrewd exterior was a persistent spectre, a hidden truth found in the shadows of his lineage. Enter Matilda of Pers, one of his numerous illegitimate offspring. Indeed, accounts suggest that Henry had over 20 children out of wedlock. Like scattered seeds, they lay across courts and monasteries, many wed to forge alliances, but Matilda's tale diverged from those strategic narratives. Born in the early 1100s and likely raised in Normandy, Matilda's fate intertwined with the House of Perche when she married Roru III, a battle-hardened crusader etched in glory. Yet, Matilda's legacy would not echo through valiant battles. Historical accounts reveal her struggle with what contemporaries termed falling sickness, what we recognize today as epilepsy. In an age steeped in superstition, such affliction was deemed a curse, a sign of divine wrath, leaving those afflicted embroiled in stigma and shame, especially when they bore royal blood. Notably absent from the grand festivities of the court and the chronicles of her time, Matilda's life remained largely unrecorded. References to her health issues hint at a life marked by isolation. Her seizures rendered her a prisoner of her own body, enduring extended periods of confinement and retreat to religious houses, likely for care rather than reflection. Though her husband, Roru, seemed loyal, the mentions of Matilda in his records are fleeting at best. Her passing drew little attention, her funeral lost among the ordinary, her grave scarcely marked, a silent testament to a woman whose royal ties did little to protect her from erasure. Though she was a king's daughter and a countess, the burdens of her condition eclipsed her identity. Matilda's story serves as an unsettling reminder that royal lineage could carry not just privilege, but also hidden burdens, sickness, and societal stigma that no amount of lineage could conceal. Henry I, devastated by the loss of his legitimate heir in the infamous White Ship disaster, sought to craft a resilient dynasty. Yet, within Matilda's overlooked narrative lies a profound truth. The human experience resists even the most strategic of royal ambitions. The legacy of Matilda beckons us deeper into the royal bloodline, where the next chapter does not fade into the countryside but ventures into the mind fraught with judgment. A princess dubbed mad, her peculiarities stirring whispers in the shadows, a life observed but rarely understood. In the annals of history, the name of Joan of Bar, granddaughter of King Edward I, emerges like a whisper, merely a fleeting note amidst the grand symphony of medieval royalty. Born around 1295 to Henry III, Count of Bar, and Eleanor of England, Joan was enveloped in privilege that offered little assurance for her future. Her bloodline connected her to great conquerors and crusaders, yet her narrative was destined to play out in the shadows, often encapsulated in the realm of quiet speculation. Joan's existence unfolded in a world divided between the regal courts of France and the diplomatic echelons of England. As a potential political pawn, she embodied connections cloaked in silks, though her delicate health and reclusive nature often drew scrutiny. Medieval texts describe her not just as frail but hinted at deeper turmoil, referring to her enigmatic aura. Some whispered of her speaking with spectres or having an eerie silence that set her apart. Promised in marriage to the much older John Deering, Earl of Surrey, this union, like many royal agreements, was thrust upon her, yet it was fraught with challenges. The engagement faltered, leaving her families in embarrassment, for Joan's reticence rendered her a difficult partner. As the betrothal stalled, she receded further from the life of the court. Documents indicating her adult years now stem not from the records of nobles but from the annals of the Church. At the Abbey of Cluny, monks chronicled her not only as a noble countess but as a woman battling inner demons. Medieval manuscripts hint at her profound silence, often labeling her affliction as a spiritual disorder. Modern scholars speculate on the possibility of a psychiatric condition, ranging from depression to psychosis. Yet in her time, misconceptions framed her plight as a divine test, illuminating her family's struggle between shame and care. In a twist of fate, when her cousin Edward III ascended the throne, Joan was noted again, briefly as a ward of the crown, receiving a pension that felt more akin to house arrest than a royal privilege. Her name faded once more, and the uncertainty surrounding her death loomed large. Yet the essence of her existence remains, a respect for her suffering that transcended mere scandal, hinting at familial compassion for her struggles. In the unforgiving realm of royal expectations, her condition was accepted as an unfortunate fate rather than a shameful secret. Nevertheless, silence bore implications for her lineage, hinting at echoes of distress that would reverberate in future generations. As the Hanoverian kings grappled with their own daughters wrestling with similar spectres of mental distress, Joan's legacy, quiet yet potent, would resonate long into the fabric of history, charting the narrative of a royal lineage entangled with the struggles of the mind. 22. King George IV. In the realm of British royalty, King George IV presents a figure more entranced by elegance than authority. Extravagant and performative, his commitment to the artifice of sophistication was palpable. Beneath his lavish tastes and unpredictable temperament lay a profound sorrow, particularly with the fate of his only daughter, Princess Charlotte of Wales. Born to privilege, yet burdened by pain, she was destined to tragically fade from existence during her father's reign. Charlotte represented the brightest hope of the House of Hanover. She won public affection with her spirited and intelligent nature, a stark contrast to the aloofness often associated with royalty. Unlike her contemporaries, she embraced life with laughter and candidness. Yet, from the outset, her fragile physique betrayed her spirited personality. Descriptions from the era reveal her struggle with clumsiness and an unsteady gait, compounded by persistent health issues that worsened as the years passed. Despite her vibrant character, her body bore the weight of vulnerability. Medical assessments suggested curvature of the spine, likely a case of scoliosis or something similar, along with episodes of exhaustion that frequently confined her to bed. Those close to her hinted at fainting spells and episodes akin to what they termed nerve storms, hinting at possible unrecognized neurological challenges. The relentless pressure of expectation as heir exacerbated her ailments, as her father viewed her more as a political pawn than as a cherished daughter, restricting her education, social engagements, and even access to her mother. Charlotte embodied a mixture of rebellion and sensitivity in the midst of this oppression. When she married Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg in 1816, it sparked a momentary national fairy tale. Their affection and shared principles captured the public's heart. However, her health remained precarious. Her initial pregnancy ended in sorrow with a miscarriage. Later, during a monitored pregnancy in 1817, she endured over 50 hours of labor, resulting in the tragic birth of a stillborn son, leading to her own death just hours later at the tender age of 21. The nation mourned deeply, a palpable grief resonating throughout the lands. Yet, amidst the public displays of sorrow, another truth lingered unspoken. Charlotte's medical challenges had been overlooked for far too long. Her spinal issues, her inexplicable weakness, and her fatigue had been hidden, overshadowed by the expectations of her status. In the aftermath of her passing, King George IV was never the same, suffering both emotionally and dynastically. The sudden loss left the throne without a direct successor, prompting a chaotic scramble for power that would alter the monarchy's landscape. But her story raised a haunting question. What might her life have entailed had her significant health issues received proper attention instead of dismissal? Charlotte's plight was not singular. She was one of many royal women burdened by hidden suffering. In the generations that followed, silence surrounding mental illness and neurological vulnerabilities would evolve into something more sinister, entwined with the confines of asylums, inaccuracies in official records, and the erasure of two women from the annals of royal history. Princess Alice of Battenberg was a woman bound by royal ties, born into a lineage of monarchy, wed to royalty, and a mother to a royal heir. Yet throughout her life, she existed almost like a ghost in the grand halls of power, living on the fringes of royal existence. Born in 1885 at the storied Windsor Castle, she was the great-granddaughter of Queen Victoria, mother to Prince Philip, and grandmother to King Charles III. Long since relegated to a mere footnote in the annals of royal history, her story was one of intrigue, quietly kept at a distance by the monarchy. Alice's childhood mirrored the expected life of upper-class Europe, shielded by the privileges of her status. Governesses, language experts, and music instructors. Her intelligence and charm shone through, and she mastered several languages. However, a profound challenge marked her early years. She was nearly entirely deaf, diagnosed with a congenital condition at just 5 years old, likely stemming from a recessive gene. While this did not hinder her academic prowess, it did sow the seeds of isolation. She became adept at lip reading in multiple tongues, so proficient that those around her often forgot her hearing loss. But in the echoing labyrinth of royal gatherings, the barriers to communication were ever present. In 1903, she united in marriage with Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, and as the years progressed, her life devolved into chaos amidst the turbulence of war, exile, and emotional turmoil. The Greco-Turkish War stripped her family of their status and wealth, and her husband faced treason charges, narrowly dodging execution. Their lives became a relentless cycle of fleeing, with their children in tow, including the young Philip, who eventually sought refuge with British relatives while Alice fell into an emotional abyss. By the late 1920s, her sorrow morphed into something more alarming. Alice proclaimed herself a vessel for divine messages. She divested herself of material possessions, practiced fasting, and contemplated a life as a nun. Her newfound fervor sparked concern within royal circles, not for its spirituality, but for its volatility. Diagnosed with schizophrenia by various doctors in Germany and Switzerland, including the controversial Ernst Simmel, she was institutionalized against her will in 1930 at a sanatorium near Zurich. For 2 long years, she was separated from her children, undergoing early psychiatric treatments that included Freudian analysis and sedatives. Labeled as sexually repressed with religious delusions and unresolved trauma, the validity of such assessments remains a matter of debate. What is indisputable, however, is the profound trauma that her confinement inflicted, not just on her, but on her family, who remained largely silent. Upon her release, Alice emerged a changed woman. She severed ties with her husband, donned the garb of a nun, and even founded a religious nursing order in Athens. During the turmoil of World War II, she took in Jewish refugees fleeing from the Nazis, an act of bravery that eventually earned her posthumous recognition as righteous among the nations. Yet, throughout this tumultuous journey, the British royal family maintained a veil of public detachment. Alice's name was seldom spoken, and her struggles remained largely unacknowledged. When she attended Queen Elizabeth II's coronation in 1953, clad in her nun's habit and standing alone amidst an ocean of aristocrats, many in the British press failed to recognize her. She was regarded as an eccentric, a distant relative from the continent. Yet, those privy to her story recognized her as a poignant reminder that even within the world's most image-conscious family, some truths weighed too heavily to be acknowledged. In time, Alice's suffering did find some recognition. However, her tale stands in stark contrast to the fates of 2 other royal women, close relatives of the Queen Mother, whose bloodline bore an even darker legacy, hidden away and declared dead while still very much alive. Queen Mary, also known as Bloody Mary, conjures images of fervor and fire. Her legacy is often overshadowed by the infamous burnings during her reign. Born to King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, Mary navigated a court fraught with political upheaval and personal rejection. Yet, beneath the surface of her notorious moniker lay a profound enigma, not concerning the life she ended, but regarding the children she never bore or believed she carried. Mary's narrative transcends the realm of diagnosed ailments. It hints at a mystery that still pervades medical understanding. Ascending the throne at the age of 37 in 1553, Mary faced immense pressure to produce an heir. To her, legitimacy signified not only political survival but spiritual approval. Having witnessed her mother's disgrace and her own claim to the throne continuously challenged, Mary understood that an heir meant affirmation from the divine, evidence that she, rather than Elizabeth, possessed God's favour. In 1554, when Mary married Philip of Spain, hope soared, even though their union felt strained by distance and politics. Yet, in 1555, Mary announced a pregnancy. The signs seemed promising: a swollen stomach, stopped menstruation, and her withdrawal from the public eye to prepare a nursery. Ambassadors reported with certainty of a royal birth, declarations were made, and the court braced for the arrival of a child. However, the expected end never materialized. Her belly retreated, her health faltered, and the royal physicians could only speculate. Eventually, the optimistic announcement was quietly rescinded. 2 years later, a second pregnancy followed, mirroring the first with its excited secrecy, yet it too concluded in silence, devoid of a child. Historians today believe Mary may have experienced phantom pregnancies or pseudocyesis, a condition where a woman's body displays symptoms of pregnancy without a fetus being present. The reason for this remains hotly debated, with theories ranging from psychological stress to physical anomalies like ovarian cysts or hormonal imbalances. In Mary's situation, some speculate endocrine disorders or even early forms of uterine cancer could have led to her demise in 1558. However, no clear explanation reconciles the repeated symptoms with the court's desperate hope. These losses devastated Mary, representing not merely personal sorrow but a catastrophic dynastic blow. Without an heir, the Tudor line shifted to her half-sister Elizabeth, a Protestant, counteracting the religious restoration for which Mary had fought. While history has enshrined her as a tyrant, the reality reveals a woman beset by illness and disillusionment. She ruled a kingdom yet could not govern the silence within her womb. But Mary's plight was not the final word in Tudor medical mysteries. Her niece, born into a generation still touched by her father's heavy hand, would face her own challenges, afflictions that wreaked havoc not in her abdomen but within her veins and mind, provoking questions that lingered in hesitant shadows. In the shadowed halls of power, King Henry VIII, a figure that would ultimately shape the Tudor dynasty, understood a profound truth: the hold on power is always tentative, never an assured promise. Ascending to the throne at Bosworth Field in 1485, he was not a ruler of flamboyance, but a man marked by strategy and pragmatism, perpetually vigilant for insurrection. His marriage to Elizabeth of York united the rival houses of Lancaster and York, ushering in a semblance of peace, yet this union bore children who were entwined in complex fates beyond mere royal lineage. Among them was Mary Tudor, the youngest daughter of Henry and Elizabeth, born in 1496. Mary quickly became a valuable pawn in her father's diplomatic game, entering a marriage at just 16 with Louis XII of France, a political match designed to mend relations between two often adversarial crowns. But Mary's trajectory was anything but conventional. Initially celebrated for her beauty and charisma, she was a blossoming star in the royal sphere. Yet, as she transitioned into adulthood, whispers of her health began to emerge, hinting at disturbances that diverged from the expected tribulations of court life. Reported by foreign dignitaries, her episodes, fainting, shaking, and disorientation, pointed to a deeper malady. Historians now suggest she may have endured a seizure disorder or epilepsy, a reality that eluded understanding in her time. Back then, these struggles were brushed aside, framed as mere female frailties or the strains of royal responsibilities, hidden away like a delicate secret, especially for a woman whose worth was weighed against her potential for marriage and motherhood. The political landscape shifted drastically with Louis's death in 1515, leading Mary to marry Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk and a close friend of her brother Henry. Although initially outraged, Henry's eventual forgiveness marked a turning point. Returning to England, Mary chose a life of near obscurity, devoted to her family while quietly battling her declining health. By the 1520s, records depicted a woman increasingly frail, gradually yielding to her illnesses, until her untimely death at 37 in 1533, a year that witnessed her brother's tumultuous break with Rome as he crowned Anne Boleyn. In the clamour of royal upheaval, her passing went largely unnoticed, yet the manifestations of her sickness, unpredictable tremors and debilitating surges, paint a vivid picture of someone who, had she lived in today's world, might have been diagnosed with a neurological ailment. Unlike her niece Queen Mary I, whose public trials were publicly condemned, Mary Tudor slipped into oblivion, her struggles mischaracterized as mere frailty. Yet, the story weaves on, a tapestry of women, cloaked in nobility yet burdened by unseen frailties, each affected by hidden burdens that redirected their destinies far from the expectations of the crown. And looming ahead, a king whose daughters teetered on the brink of political peril, one of whom would bear a child whose silence from birth would herald a new legacy, one steeped in absence rather than authority. King Edward IV, a man not fated for the throne, ruled with an air of confidence that suggested otherwise. Standing tall and exuding charisma, he exhibited a rare blend of skill in an era marked by treachery and bloodshed. As the inaugural York king during the tumultuous Wars of the Roses, Edward mastered the delicate art of wielding power, balancing both force and allure. He achieved victories on the battlefield and hosted lavish feasts with equal flair. Yet, beneath this veneer of royal pomp lay a shadow that had haunted his lineage for generations, a legacy of neglected children burdened with unspoken truths. Among them was a daughter, likely conceived outside of marriage, whose life diverged drastically from the courtly norms that surrounded her. Chroniclers merely referred to her as mute and frail, much of her story obscured by the passage of time and royal censorship. While contemporary accounts hint at her existence, they exist alongside the more polished narratives of Edward's reign, found within private letters and household records that paint the picture of a girl kept at the fringes of nobility, possibly nurtured by a monastic environment. Not listed among his acknowledged bastards or the legitimate offspring of Elizabeth Woodville, she remained an elusive figure, quietly chronicled as one who seldom spoke and was often seen weeping. Further documents reveal a servant referencing the king's mute child, kept in prayer, likely in a convent or noble home. In the context of the time, being mute did not always equate to a complete absence of speech. It often encompassed delayed communication or expressions deemed inappropriate. The interpretations of her frailty imply either a physical ailment or a vulnerability to illness, placing her in a category beyond medical understanding. In an age where disability was met with spiritual dimensions, children like her were frequently absent from scholarly examination, tucked away into obscurity, perhaps under the guise of protection. From the scant details we have, it seems this daughter lived apart from the royal court, led a life of solitude, and never knew marriage. The terminology describing her evokes similar narratives found in medieval texts addressing individuals with various impairments: blessed, innocent, touched, words that cloak the harsh realities while highlighting their disconnection from the worlds they inhabited. Although Edward IV maintained a facade of grandeur, he acknowledged this daughter neither publicly nor in the annals of history. Yet financial records and caretakers indicate she was neither forsaken nor forgotten. Her story simply remained unspoken. In the royal context, such concealment was imagined as a protective measure, an assurance amidst the uncertainty of life. However, the silence surrounding this girl's existence mirrors a larger motif of fragile royal children who, due to their vulnerabilities, drifted into obscurity within their own family trees. This poignant narrative would resurface in the next generation, not through a lost daughter, but through a prince whose peculiarities prompted unease among courtiers and historians alike, raising haunting questions about the stability of the crown itself. In the year 1683, A child named George Augustus was born in Hanover, a realm within the Holy Roman Empire. This small German state, brimming with ambitions, would soon cradle the future King George II, destined to rule Great Britain and Ireland. He was born to the Elector of Hanover and Sophia of the Palatinate, a descendant of James III of England. Fate, entwined with dynastic uncertainties and Protestant alliances, destined him to become the second Hanoverian King of Britain. Yet, before ascending to the throne or speaking in Parliament, young George faced an intimidating challenge: finding his voice. His childhood was marred by unsettling difficulties that concerned his family and court attendants. Descriptions of him painted a picture of a sensitive boy. A restless spirit walked in a world full of worries. A severe stammer haunted him well into adulthood, rendering verbal communication a daunting task. Family accounts tell tales of him struggling to express himself, often stuck mid-sentence or caught in a loop of repetition until redirected by others. Some even noted his involuntary gestures and peculiar throat sounds, symptoms that may have hinted at a neurological condition which were often dismissed or silently endured. His early tutors cautiously noted that George was eager to please, yet he became easily overwhelmed. While he excelled in written subjects, particularly history and military theory, oral communication remained a significant hurdle. The anxiety surrounding public speaking was so overwhelming that reports suggest he fell ill at the mere thought of performing in front of an audience. In the rigid environment of German princely courts, this posed a serious threat to his reputation. A prince unable to articulate fluently was often perceived as weak or flawed. His mother, the sharp-witted Sophia of Hanover, stood as both a protector and a source of frustration. She expressed her belief that George was a remarkable boy, if only he could synchronize his speech with his thoughts. When George arrived in England in 1714, the death of Queen Anne ushered in both opportunity and new cultural trials. His heavy accent and stammer were glaring to British courtiers who were already wary of their German rulers. Observations noted his discomfort in public, his rigidity, and the difficulties in conversing unless it was pre-written. Upon his ascension, King George II would become known for his brash demeanor and emotional distance, traits often misinterpreted as rudeness but perhaps better understood as the shields of a man who had battled communication struggles throughout his life. In private, he was anxious, meticulously adhering to schedules, oscillating between vibrant energy and prolonged silence. Once crowned, his childhood speech difficulties became little more than whispers, quietly excised from the narrative of his reign. Still, the marks of his struggle lingered in the stilted rhythm of his speeches and the unease he exuded in his public appearances. Yet, his story foreshadows another royal descendant, one marked not only by stammering but by a crooked gait and uneven breath, a monarch who would stir controversy and challenge the royal ideals. This would be a king whose very being defied expectations, leaving behind an intricate legacy that forever altered the bloodline and the history of England. 28. King Richard III, a name steeped in infamy, shines a spotlight on a tarnished chapter of English history. His portrayal as a villain, embellished through the ages by propaganda and the arts, transforms him into a theatrical figure shrouded in cruelty and ambition. Much of this image is rooted in Shakespeare's dramatic rendition, depicting him as a scheming usurper burdened by a twisted spine and a malevolent spirit. Yet beyond this tapestry of myth, obscured by historical smear campaigns and perhaps even eerie discoveries beneath the Leicester car park, lies the intricate reality of Richard as a man distinctly different in flesh and spirit. Born in 1452 amidst the tumult of the Wars of the Roses, Richard's ascent to royalty was a tale not of fate, but of survival. His rise came as rivals fell or vanished. His tenure as king was fleeting, only 2 years long, culminating in death at the battlefield of Bosworth in 1485. Historians have long pondered Richard's physical form, debating the veracity of his alleged deformity. However, the discovery of his remains in 2012 beneath a parking lot offered clarity. He bore scoliosis, a curvature of the spine visible through his life, particularly evident in his youth and adulthood. Thus, he was neither a hunchback nor grotesquely deformed, a stark reminder that he lived with a condition that affected not just his body, but also how he was perceived in a time when monarchs were expected to embody divine perfection. Richard's narrative does not end with his passing. It extends into the shadows of his illegitimate heirs, especially John of Gloucester, also known as John of Pontefract or simply the Bastard of Gloucester. Though his birth date is shrouded in mystery, it is believed John came into the world in the 1470s and was recognized by Richard during his Duke of Gloucester days. Unlike Richard's other illegitimate child, Catherine Plantagenet, John was entrusted with titles and significant military roles, notably as Captain of Calais. Yet despite this acknowledgement, his existence remains elusive. Contemporary accounts barely describe him, save for references to his frail health, an all too familiar phrase for those grappling with physical ailments. While there is no concrete evidence that John suffered from scoliosis like his father, the hereditary nature of such conditions suggests the possibility of inherited frailty. John's struggle with acceptance seems to extend beyond mere lineage. He never entered matrimony, had no known progeny, and quickly receded from the political scene after Richard's demise. By 1499, he had slipped entirely from historical records, possibly facing imprisonment or execution under orders from Henry VII, a fate that erased his story from the annals of time. What remains is a haunting narrative, echoing the fates of many who have navigated the intertwined realms of disability and illegitimacy within royal circles, their tales often lost to silence. This troubling pattern persists: a king who defied royal ideals with his physicality and a son who faded into obscurity. The Plantagenets, fixated on notions of blood and image, birthed yet another child unable to bear these burdens. Their story continues through the woman who succeeded Richard, a ruler barren of children yet inheriting her predecessor's spectres in a new guise. Though she produced no heirs, her court was a mosaic of royal wards, individuals whose thoughts and behaviours often diverged from the calculated norms of royalty, kept safely distanced from a throne, an avoidance of inquiries best left unspoken. In the grand tapestry of history, Queen Elizabeth I stands as the Virgin Queen, Gloriana, whose choice to embrace celibacy became a cornerstone of her rule in an age that pressured her into matrimony. Mastering the delicate balance of political performance, her reign was a blend of veiled threats, poetic sonnets, and stirring speeches that could rally armies. Yet, beneath the ornate facade of empire and eternal youth lay a court bustling with orphans and distant relatives, some of noble blood and others deemed unsuitable by the era's stringent standards. Throughout her remarkable 45-year reign, Elizabeth remained childless, but her court was anything but devoid of youth. She inherited a complex network of noble families, their offspring often under her careful watch as wards of the crown. These children were the remnants of executioners' lines or politically sensitive relatives, their futures intricately tied to the Queen's legacy. Strikingly, many became figures the monarchy would later seek to marginalize, remnants of a different legacy. Historians have noted the number of royal wards labeled as simple or slow, labels that, while not medical in understanding, served as euphemisms for what we now recognize as cognitive differences. Among these were notable descendants of the Grey and Pole families, linked to claims on the throne, necessitating their closely monitored lives. Arthur Grey was described as gentle yet unremarkable, while Mary Hastings, another distant kin, was considered a potential backup in succession discussions, yet her stammering speech and gaze revealed a woman often overlooked. Raised in the serene confines of country estates under the watchful eyes of loyal nobility, These children were controlled rather than imprisoned. Some never married and became mere shadows at family gatherings, a fleeting presence that quickly faded into obscurity. Their portraits, if they survive, depict them dressed conventionally but with a haunting distance in their gaze. Elizabeth seemed to acknowledge these royal burdens, perceiving their presence as a testament to the human imperfections that accompanied divine right. She once delicately referenced those with gentle minds, perhaps hinting at one of her wards. Rather than displaying them publicly or subjecting them to ridicule, she preferred to keep them close, silent yet present. In her passing, while she left no heirs of her own, the echoes of her lineage endured, not through traditional offspring but through these overlooked figures that represented a question of heritage, the challenge of royal blood that struggled to fulfill the crown's lofty expectations. This dilemma would rise again in future generations when a new princess bore a child overseas, prompting upheaval and the resurgence of those age-old challenges, now cloaked in new colours and struggles. King Charles I, a monarch caught in the tumult of his times, found himself unable to navigate the treacherous waters of a country that had ceased asking for his consent. The offspring of James I and the progenitor of civil unrest, his story is drenched in tragedy, not merely for the conflicts he ignited but for the grim fate that befell him. To Charles, kingship was as natural as the laws of physics, divinely appointed and above reproach. Yet, this unyielding belief would lead to his demise in 1649. However, before the fateful axe fell, before the chaos of war erupted, and before divine sovereignty faced human revolt, Charles was a father, one with a sprawling clan, linked through alliances and the chaos of his government's collapse. Among his children was Mary, the Princess Royal, who would carry the Stuart legacy into the Netherlands. Yet, hers is a tale not of political machinations, but of personal heartache, a poignant reminder that even those of noble blood can suffer quiet tragedies. Born in 1631, Mary was the cherished first daughter of Charles, reshaped by the luxuries and conventions of royal life. At the tender age of 9, she was promised in marriage to William II of Orange, heir to immense wealth and power in the Dutch Republic. When they wed at just 15, it was a strategic alliance amid rising European tensions. But bliss soon turned to sorrow. William succumbed to smallpox in 1650, leaving Mary a widow at 19, expecting their only child. That child would become William III of Orange, destined to be the King of England, Scotland, and Ireland. Yet, his early years were fraught with challenges, marked by chronic health problems and a fragile constitution. Born ahead of schedule, he was plagued by respiratory ailments and infections, casting a shadow of uncertainty over his survival. Dutch and English diplomats expressed concern over his well-being, reporting episodes of weakness and illness. Matters became more complicated with his marriage to Mary II, his cousin and daughter of James II, which bore no heirs, another twist in a precarious lineage. Mary bore the weight of loss beyond William III. Before him, she suffered the heartbreak of at least one, perhaps more, children lost to infancy. One child, described inconclusively by physicians as unviable, was never named, buried, and forgotten, as was common for royal infants with disabilities in that era, a silence that echoed through history. Mary, having watched her father crumble amid political strife and witnessed the tragic fates of her siblings, bore the additional burden of these silent losses. In her quest for dynastic strength, she encountered only fragility and compromise. The story of her lineage meandered into obscurity, reflecting a historical tendency to gloss over disability and hardship, a narrative oversimplified, silenced, and all too easily forgotten. Yet, the essence of these lost children lingers on, shaping tales of power, imperfection, and legacy. Thus, the cycle of royal destinies continued, giving way not just to princes, but to queens, with one wearing the crown-like armour while her son faded from public life, ensconced behind the walls of Sandringham.